Hi, good night, everyone. It is Dushana Turner from Simply Redefining Wellness and Counseling coming to visit your homes again. Tonight, we are switching up a little bit. We're actually going to do two in one tonight. First up, we have Renata Poleon. She is the founder of a home organizing business, The Tidy Habit. She graduated from Baruch College in 2021. Yay! Congratulations. In the midst of the pan foolishness, with a degree in psychology. And from there, she found her footing in the nonprofit space, focusing on human resources. She enjoys helping people realize their potential, whether it's in their homes or in their careers. And so we want to welcome Renata.
Good night, everyone. Good night. Good night. So, as Soshana mentioned, my name is Renata, and I am the face behind the Tidy Habit. We're a brand new home organizing business, but I'm hoping to make my mark as I go along. So, I want to just at least introduce myself a little bit more because we get a chance to get to know a little bit more behind my own story about this business. So, I am from the islands, the Caribbean, and for me, I acquired a lot of experience working as a babysitter for about 10 years with several families throughout the city. And with that experience, I got a chance to really delve into childcare, but also organizing, and that's where I feel like really developed my passion for it. Um, I also became a first-time mom in 2015, and then I had another daughter in 2017, and that life experience really brought me into the space and allowed me to understand what function and beauty have to do with the business of organizing. So, as we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the things and the stuff that we acquire in our lives because this is where a lot of people get stuck in really tough predicaments where we just bring things, we are the consumers, we just bring things into our spaces, never filtering really what comes in. So, here's an amazing statistic. And also to this has been like contested and debated a lot in a lot of spaces, but it was a statistic that came out at the LA Times. At one point, it said that the average American has about 300,000 items in their household. And to imagine 300,000 items, that is a lot. Now, I don't know if they're counting every piece of paper that you have, one sheet at a time, but I can tell you to imagine 300,000 items in your household just makes you kind of cringe a little bit thinking about it. I can see it. So,
Listen, so disclaimer, I'm going to interrupt Renata. This is how I met Renata. Well, we know each other, socially, mutually, but I reached out to Renata because I was like, I need help. I need help getting rid of some of the hopefully not 300,000 things in my home.
yes, but hopefully not 300,000, but definitely a lot of things that we accumulate over time. And it's not because people want to become hoarders of things or hoarders of items. It's because a lot of these things are associated with memories. They're associated with experiences. They're associated with a lot of things that people quite frankly don't want to let go of. And it's easy to acquire all of these things and bring them into your household without even being really aware that you're bringing in so much into your space. So, I call this a legacy of stuff because of the fact that I want people to think about how they think about acquiring things and what the purpose is behind it. And also to like just developing habits and developing a mindset of why am I bringing this into my home? Is this something I really want in here? Is this something I really need? And also, too, with people bringing more things in, there's another statistic that says 54% of Americans don't even know how, like, they've admitted that they do not know how to organize. So that within itself is another issue that tells you that it's not that people don't want to get organized, they don't know how to get organized. So this is where people like me come into this space and say, I'm here to help. So we're going to discuss a little bit more about that. And I think when we're talking about motherhood, parenthood, and we're figuring out everything in terms of like how a new mom deals with this, there's a lot that needs to be addressed regarding motherhood and organizing, and how it's not only a very physical act, it's a mental act, it's an emotional act. There's always a connection of something to the act of organizing that transcends just the physical cleaning. And one of the yes, and one of the things that people need to think about when you become a parent or you're becoming a new parent is um, basically, again, what sort of legacy, what do I want to pass on to my child in terms of how they maintain their space, how they want to live within their space, what home is, what the definition of what home is, and what home looks like. So there are certain factors, I think, every time when I think of organizing, I think of the space you have, I think of your budget, and the amount of time you have. And all of that is relative to your lifestyle, because you may have the space but not the time for it. You may have the budget but not enough space. So it's something always has to give, because you can't sometimes you just can't have all three. Very rarely does anyone have all three of these things in place to be able to maintain an organized life. So I would say one of the things I encourage people to do is actually just prepare. One of the things that you need to do as a new parent is figure out how these three components work in your life, and figure out which one you have the most of, which one you have the least of, and what steps or what actions you need to take in order to be able to make it a little better. So one of the well, let's just go back a little bit. So now we were thinking about baby and bringing a child into our home, or how we deal with our children in our spaces. But the most important person in that whole dynamic is you, the parent. You're the person who, if you're not healthy and if you're not doing well, the whole household dynamic changes. So I want to basically address you first and telling you about making yourself a priority. You are the priority. You are the first and foremost priority, because a lot of times we as women, we're the primary caretakers. And if you're not doing well, it's very hard for the children to feel like they're doing well. So I would say two things I encourage people to do is this. When if you're pregnant and you're about to give birth, you're close to your delivery time, I would say prepare yourself for postpartum recovery. This is where that having a baby, as you know, takes a lot of energy from the body, from the mind, from your spirit, from everything. And it can be pretty exhausting. So I would strongly encourage that you take time to gather things that make you feel happy and feel sane. So it could be something like your favorite candle, or even get buying new journals, so that you can start doing, a little bit of like that brain dumping that we will talk about, which is my second point about brain dumping. So just small things, a great pillow, maybe your pregnancy pillow that you had, that you want to be able to be like, you know what, I like that pillow, I'll keep it, and I'll help that to get me to a place where I can relax and feel more at ease. So I would say start preparing yourself for your postpartum recovery, so that you can be able to heal yourself first and foremost. If you are already a parent, I would say just prioritizing yourself in small ways, just as a new mother would, just encouraging. I see that Zashana's putting up the slides. But yes, just making yourself a priority in that recovery space, but also for people who are not new moms and they're moms of children who are slightly older, you're just prioritizing wellness for yourself. And of course, yes, the brain dumping, I just dabbled into a bit a while ago. One of the things that I find that a lot of moms get trapped in is all the things we need to do. That litany, that list of things that seems to never end. that we have to do. And sometimes that occupies so much space in our head that we cannot get like rest, or we cannot get anything done. So I would say definitely get in the habit of brain dumping. If you remember something that you need to do, write it down. Have at least a couple pieces of paper and pencil or pen in around your house. So if a thought comes in, you put it on paper so that it gets out of your mind. So that's actually a great system to get in place. So now we're going to talk about maybe more so making room for your child, and even just organizing your home for yourself and for your family, and for give me one second, and just for the purpose of I'm sorry, I got just sorry about that. Just for the purpose of organizing, we want to talk about taking on a heart-centered approach. So somebody wants to know more about what the heart-centered approach is. The heart-centered approach is whereby we focus on the individual and their needs, as opposed to just getting things done, getting a list of to-dos done. Um, in doing so, I would say you have to remember a few things when taking on a heart-centered approach. You have to acknowledge that you will accumulate stuff, things, and realize that you are in control of the things that come into your household. Another thing is that you can't plan for everything, but you can plan for most things, and you can figure out exactly what needs to be accomplished. Another thing that also parents need to remember is that tidying and organizing, it may not come naturally to everyone, but you have the opportunity to learn. So it's small steps. Things can happen in increments, and just figuring out what works for you and what works for your family, and understanding the value of an organized home, because not only does it affect your mood and how you feel emotionally, it could also affect your health. Being in a surrounding where there's lots of dust, if you have a child with asthma, things of that nature, it really does affect their health, not just their physical health, but also their mental health too. And also prioritizing the organization and sanity of your home helps to improve wellness in your family and in your household.
Mhm.
So I've written down about 8 things that I think that can be easily done to be able to organize your home for you and your family. I would say, one, decide what you would like to have in your home. Sometimes people have things, rules in their homes, like I do not want any plastic items to come in, or plastic toys. That is okay to set that boundary and say that you don't want these things in your home, because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to clean it. You're the one who has to maintain it. You're the one who has to do all of that work, while everybody else just gets a chance to just dump, here's a gift for the baby, or here's something new for the birthday party. You can set those guidelines and just say that I'm literally, I would not like to have any more toys, or can you limit this? Or rather than that, maybe you could do a monetary gift and I get to decide what comes into my home. So that's okay with that too.
Yeah.
Also, another thing is making sure everything has a home. That's one of the most crucial things in organizing. Everything in your home has to be assigned a home. You can't come in and just drop things in different places and not even look at it when you're done with it, because it really affects the whole flow of things in your home, and also how you maintain your home. So you definitely want to make sure that everything is put away and everything has a home. Another thing is using of storage bins. I found that to be a lifesaver for a lot of things, because a lot of times too, they're not only used for like excellent organizing, they're also for those moments when you don't have time and you just want to dump everything in one place, but you'll get back to it. It
Yeah.
is totally fine to just take it and put it in there, because you don't have the mental capacity at this time to maybe just do some organizing. So to make it, put it in a space where it's just out of sight for the time being, it's okay to have storage bins. Another thing is decluttering often. You need to declutter often. The more you make it a habit, the better it is for you, because then you get a chance to be able to purge your home of the things that you do not need. If your child is 12 and you still have stuff from the time they were 6 years old, that is a problem.
Let me interrupt you, Renata. So you mentioned putting everything away. What
Yes.
if you're unable to put everything away?
So, well, and this is where a great bin within a place where you can access it at some point later actually serves a great purpose.
Mhm.
So you can have that bin in there. You're like, I do it sometimes. After doing laundry, I cannot I'm a family of 4 right now, and it's a lot of laundry. And sometimes I just cannot put things away. I don't have maybe the mental capacity at that time, or maybe even the physical capacity to do it. So
Yeah,
I would say just take it, put it in a bin temporarily, and address it when you can. Because it's like it will be there. It's okay to put things off for another time because sometimes you just really cannot give anymore. You don't have any more to give, and you
yeah,
just probably so exhausted from that day. You're probably in pain. You probably have a chronic illness. And
mhm,
that's okay to just put things away and say, you know what? I'll come back to you later.
yeah, yeah, and I think part of that too is recognizing if you have too much, right? So if you have 5 bins instead of, like, 1 or 2 bins,
Hmm.
then it might be time to do what you're saying in number 4 and, like, donate things or
Yeah.
sell things or give them away and not be
Yes.
afraid to say, "Okay, it is time to give
Exactly.
things away."
Exactly. And also too, if there is a connection to that thing your child wore when they were 6 years old, and you feel like when you want to preserve that, it's okay to find storage that allows you to do that. I
Mhm,
I go right now I have a small bag that I saved of my daughter's things from the time they were babies. And I'm thinking I probably want to keep that with me
yes,
when they get older. Maybe they could pass it on to their own children. I
yes,
didn't make it something big. It was just a small basket of clothes. So
yeah,
I got one of those bags you get from IKEA with the zipper. So that preserves everything and that keeps it sanitized. And I like being able to have that because I can look back at it and say, oh my goodness, they were so little.
yeah.
I so value.
Yeah, that's a good idea. What I did was just a small box from, like, Michael's, and
Mm,
so, like, some of the cards that they received, some of the notes they received,
yeah.
and then maybe, like, a baby hat or a baby boot or something, so it's only the things that fit in that box.
Yes, exactly. And assigning it to something small that can be contained, that doesn't take up so much space in your house, is actually a good way to go. So you say, if it goes more than that box, I need to start filtering this thing out because it's taking up too much space. So you have to assign and determine how much space you want to assign to those two things that are of sentimental value to you. So that's a good way to go. Another thing I would strongly recommend is also to, if you have young children, creating several like changing spaces. So these are things that people never really think about. Sometimes you go into someone's house, they probably just have one assigned spot for changing the baby. And when after you've had like one or two kids, you figure out it makes no sense
Mhm.
to have it that way. But doing those things like assigning several spaces for different thing for probably the same thing does help to make your space more functional. So for new moms, this one is mostly for them or moms of young children. Changing spaces around your home. If you have several levels to your house, put one on each level because that's going to save you having to walk down, up to be able to do one thing with your child that you could actually do on different levels. So that's another good tip for primarily new moms, new parents. Another thing is scheduling your cleaning, scheduling time for when you're doing your cleaning. And that one for me, I would say also to get others involved because you're one person and you can't do everything. It's not possible for you to do everything on your own. And far too often, which is sometimes very sad, moms find themselves being the ones who take on the whole responsibility of everything in their household. And as much as it's the common thing that happens in a lot of households, it's okay to reach out and ask for help and also assign family members tasks. If asking parents to they get their 5-year-old to pick up the toys that they left on the floor, getting them to get involved in the process of cleaning,
Yeah.
getting them to be excited about cleaning, figuring out a way to get them interested and participate in the process of that scheduled cleaning time is always a good thing.
Yeah.
So I would strongly encourage scheduling that cleaning time in a way that allows you to get things done and also getting your family involved in the process.
That's
I'm
a lesson
doing
that I'm learning. That's a lesson that I'm learning that it's okay at every age. So I have a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 10-year-old. At every age, they can do something, right? And, you know,
absolutely.
even beyond maybe picking up your toy, something
Mhm.
that is helpful in the house and not us as moms trying to do it all.
Absolutely. They should be from the time my daughter could stand up. She was helping pick up the toys because I had to remind myself I can't do everything for her. And this is where you get to see that you're not only prepared getting help, you're preparing your child for life, you
Yeah,
know. Someone is not always going to come behind you to pick up what you left. This could be problematic in relationships. It can be problematic when you go to college because then you're in a dorm room, maybe sharing space with someone else, and that person can't stand your ridiculous habits
yeah,
because it's getting in the way of things. It could get in the way of friendships, of relationships, and in so many things. So you really want to be passing on a life skill to your child in a way that improves their lives and improves their relationships with others, but also teaching them at the same time, showing grace to others when they're not probably the best at doing things. But of course, they'll know that, they'll get to learn that over time. So that cleaning time is really important and crucial for just not just moms and children, but just families in general to be able to participate. And I think the last thing I want to say is pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. You're juggling so many things in this life, and it can get hard. It gets hectic. It gets very difficult being a parent. And sometimes it's okay to not have everything done. And even then you can give yourself a pat on the back and say, a job well done, because I deserve to be able to say I can put some things off for later.
yeah,
But a little bit at a time, a little bit counts. Every little bit counts. It's like the same way you snowball your debt, snowball your cleaning. Start with the small things and then work your way through. And
yeah.
it's easy to get overwhelmed and look at your space and figure like, I can't do this, or oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. But if you just take the time to just start with the small things and work your way through to the bigger things, I think a lot of families can find that they will be able to get more organized as they go through the process of
Absolutely.
doing things.
What I hear you saying is balance. I hear balance.
Balance, it really is. And it really is balance, and also just acknowledging that you're one person, so that one person definitely needs that balance,
Yeah,
and with everyone else there's a team, so they pitch in too.
yeah. It's so true. It's so
Yeah.
true. Am I going to the next slide?
So actually, well, towards the last slide, it's more so about the tidy habit philosophy, but I think we're actually okay on that. So it's just saying that creating, it's what it is that I just want to mention that what you're doing is creating a safe space for yourself. You're also listening to your own needs, and also you have to meet yourself where you are. And that in itself is the philosophy that I have for my business, and I hope you have like carry on that same philosophy for your organizing journey.
That is powerful. So it says the tidy habit philosophy. And my commitment to you is to create a safe space to share ownership of the process, listening to your needs, and meeting you where you are. So just kind of recapping for anybody that's joining us, Renata is just sharing with us tips and strategies and how we can organize our homes, how we can declutter our homes, especially as moms, whether it's first time mom or mom of one, two, three, four, many. These are some habits that we can put into practice to better our lives and establish balance as moms who technically and typically do a lot, do sometimes more than we can manage.
More than we need to.
Yeah. And so it's so
Yes.
important to have a balanced life. It's so important to recognize what we are able to do, what we need help with, and
Mhm.
implementing things that will support us when we can't do the things that we need to do, right? So if we do have too many things, getting someone involved, asking for help, things
And
like
that's a big one, is the asking for help. A lot of us feel like we have to carry it all. I don't know why we feel as women sometimes we have to prove that we can do it all. And of course, this is I feel like it's a lot of the indoctrination. We grew up being told that we can do it all, but we really can't. And it's okay at those points to say, I can't burden this load and I'm going to take it and drop, like put it onto someone else, like your partner, and then they can, like, carry that load for you until at which point you decide, okay, now I can take this load back and maybe it's a little lighter
yeah.
because they helped you.
Listen, we saw our grandmothers do it and our mothers do it, and so now we think we need to do it. But I think we're learning, right? We're learning that we
Yeah.
can't do it all on our own. And I think it's just things are different, right? The
Hmm.
that our mothers had, that our grandmothers had, that our great grandmothers had, the community is different. And so with maybe us being more spaced out, somewhat removed from our families, different things like that, we have to now change things up. We have to now say, how do we establish community for ourselves? How do we not do it on our own? How do we not try to do it all?
Yes, exactly. And that's very crucial. That's literally one of the most crucial things. Sometimes your community looks like Uber Eats, you know?
Girl, and not to feel guilty about it, right? I think about it, and my grandmother cooked every day. She
Hmm.
worked long hours, she worked overnight, she worked 2 and 3 jobs at sometimes, and still cooked every day. Maybe, like, Saturday, she didn't cook.
Uh,
Sometimes it's kinda like, how? Like, I'm not doing that, and I'm exhausted, so how did she do it? But
exactly.
I'm not living her experience, I'm living mine, and it's okay to have different ways of supporting my family. And if Uber Eats means my family will eat, it's okay.
So be it.
Mhm.
So be it. And if it's, and trust me, it's insane. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes it's distance not allowing us to have that community and that family, that support we need. But now there are, again, if you have the resource of money, you're able to help yourself in some ways that doesn't necessarily involve a family member. But like I said, your Uber Eats, your Uber itself, you don't have a car, that's your community right there. Uber helps you get away. And I'm not trying to advocate for Uber. I see him mentioning Uber a lot, but
No, but I think we all understand like there are so many options. It's funny because we only started doing all this stuff in the pandemic. We didn't know about like Uber Eats and Seamless and all these other options until the pandemic, where it was just and not early on, later on, like year
yeah,
2 and a half, where it was just like, "Oh, this is an option of us being able to get something when we don't have the ability to, cook." And, we've all been home for a long time, and we were home feeding our kids breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, everything in between. And so by year 2, it was like, "Oh, this is an option. This is a helpful option."
exactly.
Yeah, all right.
And I'm glad it's all available.
Yes. Renata, thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm happy I was able to share with you guys, and hopefully, maybe I'll get a chance to do this again. I actually quite
Mm,
good
yeah,
to meet the audience, to talk to everyone who needs that information.
yes. So stick around, don't go anywhere, okay? I am going to introduce Simone, but I want you to kind of stick around, join in on the conversation, ask questions if you have any, because we're going to talk afterwards, okay?
Yes,
Thank you again. Hold
you're
on.
welcome. Mhm.
So, guys, we also have Simone Toomer. Uh, she's been holding space for expecting and postpartum families for over 10 years. Um, we've been having these conversations and we've been learning about birth, and we know that birth has a powerful way of healing and transforming you. And her first birth did just that. her ability to have two empowered births the way that she wanted to give, um, gives light and a need for advocacy and education. She provides doula support amongst the birthing community, especially with Black families. She is a mama. She's a doula. She's an internationally board certified lactation consultant, childbirth educator, and an infant sleep educator. She's been teaching and mentoring doulas along the way and has started a new chapter as a prenatal business consultant. So
Mm.
we want to welcome Simone.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone. It's so funny. I was having technical difficulties, so I'm joining in on my phone. But for a while, I was black and white, and I was like, "Am I gonna look that way when?" Oh my God.
Yep. That was me needing to like make you laugh.
Well, I am so happy to be here. Really just open to the conversations and normalizing. It's funny when she said ask for help, right? Like how, especially as black families, black women, how hesitant we can be to ask for help, and how that shows up in our relationships, and our births, and our postpartum, and trying to do it all on our own, and just really wanting to hold space for families, advocacy, empowerment, and really being like, this is your birth, like be equipped, be empowered. So that's spiel.
So obviously we know each other. We are friends. We are
Yeah.
mamas together. But I want you to share with everyone kind of like how you got into this space, a quick synopsis of how you began your journey, and then just share some good info with us.
Okay, so I have a daughter she'll be 11 in October, which is absolutely crazy, like going to middle school. But I had an unmedicated birth with her at Methodist Hospital in Brooklyn. I personally knew, like, for many reasons, I chose to have an unmedicated birth, and I, as a doula and just a person who's like empathizing and supporting families, it's like this was my birth choice, right? But I remember my doctor being like, it's 2012. Why would you do that? Modern medicine, right? And then another one in the
Your
same.
doctor said this to you.
Yes, yes. And and you must have, like, you should have seen my face, because it was like, well, our bodies do this. And let's not talk about birth interventions and going down that road, but that's like a whole childbirth education
Yeah,
session.
please, yeah,
Um,
please go there. You already know. Wait, so when the doctor said this to you, had you already been educated about what you wanted to do or
so it was never, the epidural wasn't something that I kind of went into, like, knowing I was pregnant and having a baby, being like, yeah, because some people are straight up like, make sure them drugs are on deck right away, right? But I was fortunate to have a doula, fortunate to be empowered, right? I knew the birth that I wanted. I knew I wanted to breastfeed postpartum. I knew how connected I wanted to be into the process. Um,
Mhm,
I took an 8-week childbirth education class, which just empowered me even more. And I had a college friend who we now both have kids all around the same age. She had all of her kids at home.
mm,
And that was also like, okay. And I went on to have my second at home. But with my first, I was just like, nah, some people go, oh, it's my first, I want to be in the hospital just in case anything happens. And so I remember, besides saying, hey, it's 2012, why would you do that, another colleague said, I'm an African woman and I have 5 kids, and I had an epidural with one, and you're small, and oh my gosh, the pain, what if you stress out, and the baby's heart rate. And now in hindsight, what we know is there's like fear tactics, right? In medicine, especially when it comes to Black women, right? There are
mhm,
tactics used. I call it fear-based medicine.
yeah,
And first time mom, you don't know what labor is gonna be like. You don't know how you're gonna react. But I was very firm, and I personally find birth to be a very spiritual journey. I feel like a goddess when I'm pregnant and in the labor, delivering my babies and unmedicated. It's just like a whole nother high. And so,
yes.
and even on hindsight, it was also like, just get formula, just in case, right? Like, you don't know what your breasts are gonna do. And I remember being like, nah, my baby's gonna breastfeed and we're gonna be good. And so that just took me down the journey. I had the birth that I want. I had the support that I needed, which is also another factor, right? Like support prenatally, support after. And then I became a doula a year and a half, 2 years after. And I was just like, people need empowerment. They need resources. They need to know the deal in these hospital systems with birth. They need to know that, like, we be spending a lot of money on our baby showers, but let's put a little coins to the side for a doula, right? Like, half of the stuff on our baby registry, I'm pretty sure we don't use, right? So it's like, let's be real about certain things. Let's be real about priorities. Let's be real about education. Let's be real about our birth choices and knowing that everything is a choice,
Yeah.
right? And as a
And exactly what you just said, because Renata mentioned it, right? Like, let people know what you want. So instead of those toys that are not going to get played with, those things that you don't need, and we all know they tell you to put 150 things on your baby registry, and the only thing you really need is Pampers. You
yeah,
don't even really need clothes because the baby's gonna be on your chest.
like really, it's very that we end up needing. Um, and I'm not talking about like high risk pregnancies here. I'm not talking about people who we know need to be under like OB care in a hospital being monitored.
Mhm.
I had my first when I was 25, 26. I had my second when I was like 32 or so. Um, Unfortunately, in America at 35, you're geriatric age, right? And automatically high risk, but everyone should be treated as an individual too, right?
Can
And
I just tell you to preach? You already know. So my first was at 35,
mhm,
and then my second was 38, and my third was 42, almost 43. And at Methodist, when I was going to get my like NST and BPP done, the nurse like went crazy and was screaming across the room in front of other people, like, it's not ACOG recommended that you have a child. Da, da, da. And I'm like, lady, mind you, at 38, I had my first vaginal birth. At
mhm.
42, I had my second vaginal birth. Like, that label of geriatric is a word that I can't say on
Like,
camera.
it's bad enough they're looking at us as Black women, and we know the statistics. We know the rates we are dying. We know, like, white high school students have better chance of surviving birth than educated, doctoral Black women, right? And I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole of like, everybody should know that they have this right. And I'm going to scream it from the mountaintops. And I got all these certifications and I went on to become a lactation counselor, now a lactation consultant. I nursed both of my kids well past one, well past two. Um, and we talk about like choice, right? And sometimes expectations. Certain things were not my expectations. I didn't expect to be nursing a toddler.
Yeah.
But it was like, let's normalize certain things. Let's educate and empower people in their birth and postpartum choices. And let's also ensure support. Because if I didn't have the education and support, I could have been scared to give birth, right? And be like, oh, my doctor knows more than I do, right?
Which a lot of women believe. A
You know,
lot of women believe that they cannot trust their own bodies. They
yes.
cannot trust their own intuitions. And so they give into what the doctor wants, or, even a midwife. I'm going to
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
midwife wants. Um, and the thing that I try to emphasize, I had a C-section with my first. That doctor is not going home with you to take care of that child. Like, if a C-section is necessary, right? If it is truly necessary and it's not a bait and switch, then okay. But it has to be carefully considered,
Hmm.
the pros and the cons, because there are a lot of cons, there are a lot of risks that are not discussed. And the reality is a C-section is like major abdominal surgery while you're taking care of a child. I'm taking care of infant after you just
And you're in the hospital 2 days. Other surgeries, you're getting like physical therapy, occupational therapy, right? I hurt my knee. Oh my gosh, I have to follow up. And you're usually not following up until like 6 weeks after. And let's not talk about how invasive a cesarean birth is, right? Um, but for me, it was really I take birth now for friends and family. I am more in the lactation wheelhouse now with Chocolate Milk Cafe, and I used to work at WIC, and I used to also be a part of the clinic at Methodist, helping them become baby friendly. Um, but it's just like we have to really not only look at the education and the resources that we have, but let's have these conversations early on in pregnancy and postpartum to make sure our doctors align with us, even midwives, like you said, right? And that was the difference for me between my first and my second. I did a midwife who was very much like, here's the evidence, you make the decision for yourself, right? Very just like autonomy, honoring that, honoring my choices. It was
yeah.
that was beautiful birth experience for me
She's
that
talking about Takia. She's talking about
it
Takia,
was
y'all.
a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah. If y'all don't know who Takia is, y'all just go find the was it the last video? Maybe the second to last. Watch all the videos, but Takia, our midwife, is
Yes.
in one of those videos
Oh,
because
it's just like no matter where she is in the United States, because she's not in New York anymore. It was such a beautiful experience to feel like this is my body, this is my birth, which I always knew, but it's like someone is really saying like, here, these are really your choices.
yes,
Do with the information what you want to do with it.
yes.
Um,
And
and
that's so important because we forget that. We forget that we're a patient, but we are paying these providers. Like these providers are supposed to be working for us.
yes,
It's just with us, not telling us what to do,
mhm,
providing us with information and providing us with support.
yes, yes.
And
And,
a
and
lot of times we forget that.
and we don't know their stance, right? We're waiting until 37, 38 weeks to have these conversations. We're walking into the postpartum visits or even leaving the hospitals with formula, right? There's already biases against us with birthing and breastfeeding rates. And so, unfortunately, they're already looking at us a certain way. And so, for me, the passion is like, let's not remember like the village mentality. Let's not remember when we could rely on our aunties and mothers and grandmothers to also support us with our children. And sometimes you leave your baby with your sister and maybe they nurse them, right, type of thing.
Mhm.
Dad, kids all at the same time, or grandma's coming over to help make soups and stews and teas for your to bring in that milk. There's just certain nutrients that you would eat from a cultural standpoint postpartum, and I think this is such a sacred time that unfortunately in the United States we don't get to honor as much. And it's just like this constant, like, I got to get back to work, I don't have these funds to do X, Y, and Z. And I think it's like time to really reframe that and really ensure that we have the support that we truly need, and that we are not succumbing to the medical system the way that Black women are.
Yeah, it's important that we educate ourselves. It's important that we ask questions and we make sure that we're receiving
Yes.
answers, but then checking in on our answers, right? Even I realize having someone go with you to your appointments, right? So that if you're kind of distracted or you hear one thing based on maybe your relationship with the provider, the other person can kind of check in with you and say, did you hear what they really said? Did you notice that they didn't answer your question? Did they notice that they like push their agenda on you versus supporting you having a choice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. They're really good at like rewording things and inserting the data, and sometimes the data is skewed too. It's just one perspective.
Yeah.
um, so as a doula and a lactation consultant, I'm always trying to work from a place of like compassion and evidence.
Yes. And the reality is, though some of the data may be accurate, it does not apply to everyone. Everybody is not the same,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
They talk about a lot of times, they say high risk and they say like, if you are African American, if you are a certain age, if you
Yep.
are overweight or obese, because they try to tell me certain things. I was told multiple times you cannot have a vaginal birth but I had two vaginal births in
Mhm.
spaces where I was supported, in spaces where I was encouraged.
Absolutely.
Even the ideal of like being afraid of preeclampsia or diabetes, high blood pressure, assumptions were made about me
Mhm.
despite the fact that I was completely healthy and all of my blood work and multiple tests confirmed that I was healthy. But there was the assumption she's geriatric, she's 35, she's 38, she's 42, she's overweight, she's Black. She must be suffering from this. I literally had a physician who was not my physician come in after a BPP NST at a hospital in Long Island with my second and like declare that I was whatever. Like she literally asked, like, do you have high blood pressure? No. Do you have diabetes? No. Do you have hypertension? No. Do you have and I'm like, lady, just because you're saying different titles for the same things doesn't mean the answer has changed.
Yes.
And then my thing is, even if you don't believe me, right? Even if I'm like delusional and I don't want to tell you I have diabetes, if you check my medical records, you could see whether or not I have diabetes.
Yes. Yes.
And she literally, like, she was trying to cover all of them, but say, like, she said it like in plain terms, and then she said it in like medical terms. And I'm like, the answer's
Give
no.
it to me. No, I find, it's funny to be where I'm at in regards to like a doula of 10 years, a lactation consultant, a mom, and seeing a slew like supported cesareans, birthing centers, home birth, hospitals, all throughout and the city. And at the end of the day, it's like be informed, make the decisions that work for you, right? And just like accountability in those decisions too, which sometimes can be hard as well. And
Mhm.
just, like encourage important, like in any relationship, right? Communication.
Yeah. It's funny because I know you know my story with Takia. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not sure how much I've shared before, but like I was pregnant and the pandemic was looming, and I was 42 plus weeks pregnant. And, you know, it was recommended that I have an induction. My fluid was low and I didn't want it. I'd had two inductions previously. One led to a C section, the interventions and the unnecessary interventions, as well as the unnecessary C section.
Mhm.
When I checked my medical records, I read some things that were not what was told to me.
Mhm.
So thinking of a third induction was just scary and frustrating. And I didn't want to do it, but my midwife gave me the information and let me choose. And
Yes.
it took me a little bit longer than she would have liked. She may or may not admit that, but I knew she was like, I'm letting you choose. I'm giving you power, but I said what I said and let's go. Um, but the reality for me was her informing me and then letting me choose, not forcing it on me because
Yes.
in my first birth, I was misinformed. I
Mhm.
was lied to. In my second birth, power was taken away from me. I literally had someone tell me, "You don't have a choice."
So, mhm.
So with my third, it was so healing for me to have the time to make the decision, and
Yes.
even having to have a third hospital birth when I planned a home birth was still so healing for me because in my hospital experience at Woodhull Hospital,
Mhm.
they respected me and
Yep.
they talked to me and they educated me. And my husband and I are still to this day astounded at what they shared with us because they
Yeah.
shared with us things that we had not learned in our first birth or our second birth. They
Okay.
stopped and took time to show us different procedures that needed to be done, explain different procedures, and that had never been done before, even though I had two inductions previously.
Yes. Yes.
But that's what's necessary, right? Educating a mom, giving the mom information, giving the parent information, and then letting them decide,
Yes.
not deciding for them, not taking their power away.
A decision that you want them to make. And we're biased because we know Takia, but it really is like honoring like true autonomy. And it just like it's so interesting to think of a provider that is like holding you down 100%, that feels more than just a provider but like a part of your family at the end of the day.
Yes,
And I'm like, if midwives can practice like that, which they tend to all around the world in other countries, right? Like what's going on here?
yes, absolutely. And I got sidetracked, but what I was thinking was you said it. Being able to be in different spaces, right? Whether it was a hospital, a home birth, a birthing center, we have those options and we have those choices for those things not to be taken away from us, for us to not just think I can only give birth in
Yes.
a hospital or even I can only give birth at home, right? Like my experience was that I ended up giving birth in a hospital for the third time, but it
Yes.
was a completely different experience, though it wasn't what I planned for or what I wanted, right? And I think that all the time, they say like be in the hospital and be safe. Well, if a hospital can be safer, let it be safer, right? If
Mhm.
everything is there, if an emergency occurs, then let me labor in peace. Let
Yeah.
me labor without the bright lights, without the interruptions. Let it be a place where I labor safely
Yes.
because the operating room is down the hall.
Yeah.
So I don't need all the interventions. I don't need all the interruptions. Just let me do. And
What?
that's how I ended up having my second. That's how I ended up having my second vaginally. Kind of unintentionally, the midwife abandoned me, but
Yeah.
basically she left me alone. And because she left me alone,
Things happened.
yeah, and the OBGYN on call said, "It's your right to labor." And
Yes.
once she said it was your right to labor and, like, gave me that affirmation, that space, 4 hours later, I went from 4 to 10.
Yes. And imagine how much a birth is psychological too, right? How much we hold on emotionally that shows up in our cervix not opening up or us just not relaxing and holding on to so much tension or trauma, right? From our past birth experiences and so forth. So I really try to, when having these conversations with family, even like breastfeeding, right? We don't know the stories of our aunts and our sisters and our mothers that we're carrying on and attaching to ourselves, and just knowing like this is your body, this is your journey, right? Like make it your own story.
Yeah, yeah. So talk to me more about that. We've been chatting because we know each other, and we actually need to just go and have brunch or something.
But keep going. Yes.
Talk to us about breastfeeding, right? So, what are some ways we can prepare for um,
Yeah,
breastfeeding, maybe prior to getting pregnant and then while we're pregnant?
yeah, for sure. So I think like for me who's been able to work in a clinic, I have those conversations with people from the time like start planting those seeds from your first trimester, right? Like, hey, are you thinking about how you're gonna feed your baby? And I think oftentimes we are so focused on the birth, postpartum recovery and breastfeeding is just not at the top of the list, right? We are so focused on birth, what's gonna
Yeah,
happen. And
yeah,
it's an important day, right? And but it's so small given the aftermath of it all.
yes,
And so
yeah,
what we find is prenatal education impacts the initiation of breastfeeding, which means like I took a class, I know some things, I'm more likely to start breastfeeding because I know some things. I know my body already has milk, but getting a lactation consultant, seeking support out, those things really impact the duration of breastfeeding and really ensures that a parent meets their goals with breastfeeding. So, we leave the hospital and a lot of times some people are like, okay, I couldn't afford a lactation consultant, even though, disclaimer, insurance should be covering pumps, should be covering lactation consultants. Some try to finagle their words and their coding so they don't have to reimburse, but
yeah,
technically by law they should cover lactation visits. Check in with your hospital and who do they have lactation consultants on staff, because that's ongoing support. It's so easy to
yeah,
go home and be like, this is really really hard, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm all the things. Make sure your partners, if you have partners, they are pouring you water every time you're pumping or drinking, you are eating every time you're pumping or nursing. And it's really a matter of like that long-term consistent check-ins that really impact and empower people to continue nursing and meeting their feeding goals.
yeah, yeah. And then, how do you find support out? So I know you mentioned your chocolate milk cafe.
Yeah,
How do you find support outside? So let me just say this out loud. Most hospitals have
they
some
do.
form of
They
lactation support.
absolutely.
It should be told to you, it should be available to you. Sometimes you kind of have to seek it out for yourself. Sometimes hospitals, like the one that I went to for my second birth, do not have a lactation consultant and don't have support.
Okay.
But even if you don't have it at the hospital that you gave birth, you can still tap into other hospitals in your area to
Mhm.
find support. Outside of a hospital support for lactation, what else can we do?
So if you are a WIC participant, a lot of the WIC offices have a breastfeeding department and they have peer counselors. You have Chocolate Milk Cafe, which is a Black breastfeeding support group for like peer-to-peer support group for those who we say identify with the African diaspora. We have La Leche League, which is also a support group, but uh, it comes with its things. I'll say, I think it's really important for us as Black families to be supported by Black providers. That's something that's always been important for me, or someone who understands us. You could even ask your pediatricians regarding their referrals for a lactation consultant, but be very careful on the advice you might take from your pediatrician regarding breastfeeding and pumping, because the reality is in medical school they may not have had the most education in breastfeeding.
And I will second that. Thankfully, with my experience in the hospital, the lactation consultant that came to see me was like, "Oh, you have colostrum, you're good to go." The
Yes.
pediatrician that came behind her was like, "Oh, you need to formula feed," and scared me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I wasn't able to breastfeed my first.
Yeah.
Um, but our pediatrician, he was a Black West Indian man, older, and he was like, "You just need to keep trying." He's like, "If they said you got milk and your baby needs to eat, you need to keep trying."
Yes.
Um, and thankfully, I was able to go on to breastfeed my second and my third into toddlerhood. With and so I'm totally interrupting you and I'm jumping, but talk about tongue ties because that's something that I experienced and I had not.
I cannot. That's like how many more minutes do we have? Because that's
We
what.
we could take a few minutes. Take a few minutes to talk about it.
Okay, so I am a lactation consultant today. Like I've always had a passion for lactation, but my second was born in 2018. The theory is with each baby you make more milk. And I remember my milk coming in. First off, I remember him in my bed, in my arms, latching, and that first latch being like, what was that? He does not have teeth. So what was that? And
Mhm.
then I remember my milk coming in, and I remember my nipples being shredded, which it should not be. We talk about cracked nipples, we talk about bleeding nipples. You should not be having those, right? And I remember I was blessed enough to have colleagues to come in and do weighted feeds and all of that. And long story short, my son had a posterior tongue tie, which is a tongue tie that's very like to the naked eye, you cannot see, and a lip tie, and that was hindering his ability to latch on deep. I have my little breast here for demo, right? And so imagine a baby who's supposed to latch and get onto the areola and comfortably massage the breast. But with a baby with a tongue tie, they tend to kind of just chomp on the nipple a bit, and it feels like it's biting, it feels like it's pinching, all the things. And a tongue tie is just anatomically the frenulum under the tongue is tight, it has limited motion, and so it often compromises a deep latch. Babies sometimes slip off. Mom's nipples are vertically compressed, lipstick shaped, cracked, bleeding. Supply can be compromised because oftentimes baby may not drain the breast efficiently, and that leads to other things. So, um, in my experience, it's like a special training, right? Like not you can have IBCLC lactation consultants that are not even well versed in tongue ties. You definitely tons of pediatricians. The referrals to dentists or ears, nose, throat specialists is very different across the board with it and how you get it revised. But
Mhm.
also from a holistic standpoint, I often look at breastfeeding challenges and think about the birth. Was there Pitocin? Was there a long birth? Was baby in malposition, like a little tilted or a hand up? Like even in prenatals, I'm already like empowering mom to be like, where are you feeling kicks? Where are you feeling hits? You know, because that lets us know baby, like where is baby in utero, and that can impact the labor and then also impact the postpartum and how baby's feeding. If baby has a preference to one side, so I really like to look at the whole picture, but long story short, the tongue tie with my son threw me just straight in the rabbit hole with not only becoming a lactation consultant, but really like trying to fine tune my skills with tongue ties, assessing function of the tongue, tension in the body, and referrals because it takes a team. I'm constantly referring to chiropractors, osteopaths, dentists. It really takes a team to ensure long-term breastfeeding and stability and maintaining it all. It's not an easy job, you know, and those beginnings are you're so vulnerable in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much we need to talk about. We're gonna have to do this again.
Sure.
So, like, quick recap. We need community. We need support. We need education.
The village.
Whether you're talking about birthing, whether you're talking about breastfeeding, just postpartum recovery across the board, we need to be able to educate ourselves, ask the questions, and surround ourselves with people who are going to support us, right? You just listed a host of people that up until like my third birth, I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking about going to a chiropractor. And a chiropractor, thanks to your recommendation, made a world of difference for my
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the list goes on. My referral list is off the chain, prenatally, postpartum for our babies. But it's like it's not just about your OB. It's not just about your midwife. It's like so many branches to the tree.
Yeah, yeah. And so let me just say this to the mamas that are listening or that will listen. Shout out to Laddie721. I saw your comments on here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. Um, Research,
Mhm.
educate yourself. If you don't have a team that is supporting you, create your team, right? Do not limit yourself.
Mhm.
Make sure that you have people like in your family, but then also the medical providers. Make sure they have your back. Make sure they have your best interests at heart. Make sure that they are willing to give you all the information and give you accurate information so that you can be successful in your birth,
Yeah.
in your recovery, in your breastfeeding journey across the board, right? Um, on our website, we are going to provide the information for Simone, and we're going to also provide some other helpful information. So just make sure to check us out at Simply Redefining. Hi, Christine. Yay. I'll see you in a little while. Simplyredefining.com. And where can they find you, Simone?
They could find me so I have a few things going on right now, but long story short, wisewomandoula.com. There you could see like the doula services that are offered, the lactation services. You could Google me and find me on multiple platforms. And I do tons of virtual education too, and serve New York City and Charlotte.
I was going to close out, but I had something that came to mind that I wanted to ask you about. Instead of just logging off at 9, I'm going to ask you to talk about this. What happens when a mom wants to relactate?
What happens when they want to relactate? Like
Mhm.
the process?
Yes.
So, number one question I might ask is like, have they lactated before? Do they have other kids? Because oftentimes, if we had milk prior, it's easier to relactate. It could just be a matter of adding more stimulation to the breast. Like, what was that gap between you feeding your first and now when you want to relactate, or has it never happened? So it could look like a lot of stimulation with the pump constantly to mimic feeds, so those hormones can spike. And in many cases, if someone may not have had lactated before, it's medication to kind of trick the body into thinking they're pregnant and to increase certain hormones, and then the pumping to stimulate the milk production and increase the milk production.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
So if it's a first time mom, and so say, for example, for me, originally, he latched, I had colostrum, he was getting the colostrum, and then I believe I was pumping, but
Hmm.
then kind of just dwindled down because he wasn't latching. So it did turn out that he had a tongue tie. It did turn out that I had Pitocin and he slept for like 20 hours a day for several days. So what about a first time mom that maybe the baby latches for like a day or two and maybe have colostrum for sure and
Yes.
the baby stops? Is it possible to relactate like 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in?
So what I usually say with moms is like, we could always work on the latch. We could always work on position. The main thing is to ensure that you secure your milk supply. Right. And so if we know baby's not getting a good latch, they're not the best nurser, then you're pumping. There's something called a triple feed plan where you put baby to breast for practice, for suckling, for comfort, but then you follow up with pumping to ensure that there's removal of the breast milk, because the more you remove milk, the more milk that you make. And then you give that in a bottle or a syringe, however you want to feed baby, to ensure baby's getting what they need.
Okay.
There, a week not nursing, 2 weeks is to me, that's like, oh, we got it, we could do this, right? It's a matter of your commitment to pumping so regularly, which can be daunting for some people, and just once again tricking the body into like, hey, I'm feeding this baby on demand as often as possible. Yeah.
That's good to know. That's good to know. That's something that we need to talk more about as well.
Yeah.
We got to take some notes and write down all the things that we need to talk about because we are going to do. So let me say this. We are wrapping up our mommy wellness group. We're going to have one more live later in the summer, but we are going to hold the mommy wellness group again. And so, Simone, of course,
Oh,
you
yeah.
are invited to join us for our next session. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me tonight. It's always good to see your face. I appreciate you.
Yeah, this is always fun. I love these types of things.
So we are going to say goodnight, guys. Hopefully, we will see you guys soon.
Take care, everyone.